expecting a few other folks. I mean, and we'll let them jump in as soon as they arrive, but don't want to delay because we want to try to keep this to an hour. Our ground rules basically are this: if you can keep your audio muted when you are not talking, when the facilitator, or I should say the moderator, asks you to unmute, if you can keep your questions or remarks to right about a minute so we can flow through the conversation and get as much from each other as possible. This is highly interactive. We want your input. We want your expertise, your experience. We want your questions and inquiries and concerns, also your context to this. So we'll, when you do speak for the first time, we'll ask everybody to at least unmute and maybe do an introduction. Just let us know where you are, what city you're in, and if you're a DVULI grad or not, what year you went through the program, and we'll take it from there. But my privilege today is to introduce you to Myron Bernard. Myron is also not just an alumni of our program, but he's one of our trainers for our Systems Thinking Conference, comes back here to the West Michigan area in the fall every year. In fact, we'll see him in a few weeks next month at NC2, and I mean, just delivers on so many fronts. Formerly with YFC, and I'm gonna let Myron actually tell you more about himself. But for right now, let me turn it over to you, Myron, and take us away. Thank you, brother.
Yeah, well, hey, welcome everyone. Just a heads up, we're still working on, it looks like we got a Zoom update and we're still looking on what they did with the chat bar. We have some notes that are open here. You should be able to use some of these notes as you log in. So until we can get the chat bar figured out exactly, at the bottom of the screen, there's a little button that says notes. If you pop that open, there should be a note shared by me and we can type and share some thoughts in there. So as Gerald said, I was a DVULI alumni class of 2011, and that's where I got to meet that young, good-looking man, Adrian McConnell, right down there, when he was going through with the Dallas cohort. But I was with Seattle-Tacoma. So I live in Tacoma for a long time. I've lived here since 1997. Originally grew up in small-town Colorado. I started working with young people in the community, in the neighborhood, doing a lot of work with people, with young people in our detention center, and then recognizing that we had to do work with them when they got out of the detention center. And I started doing that work in about 2002. But 3 years ago, I took a position with the Tacoma Rescue Mission, and I've been working a lot with people who are experiencing homelessness, which includes families, includes unaccompanied minors as well, sadly. That's not the specialty of our organization, is working with unaccompanied minors. That's a really unique and challenging place. But I do have, gosh, one of the most discouraging things in all of the work that I can recall doing is, it was my first year here at the Tacoma Rescue Mission, and I was greeting people as they were going in for lunch, and I got to see one of the young people that I knew from the community. And you recognize, especially going into systems thinking, that systems are related, that the young people that we're working with right now in our cities are at a much higher risk of ending up in homelessness. And having worked in homelessness systems for the past 3 years, you have a deep appreciation and understanding just of our enemy hates and picks on those who are already severely disadvantaged. And when someone is falling through the cracks to the bottom of our society, you know, any human would just lift their foot up and stop the oppression and choose to have compassion and mercy, even to a small degree. But it's like the enemy just decides to be even more merciless and show less. Yeah, just so like when someone's trapped in that spot is even more cruel. So we know that young people are loved by God, and we also know that many times we have young people in our cities and urban communities that are just also very, very disadvantaged. And we want to talk about that today. So quick shout out. It looks like looks like I'm seeing someone say I'm too kind. I'm guessing that's my man, Adrian. We look great given we're a few years old in when we first met. That's true. But Adrian knows that black don't crack. He's keeping that real. I'm doing my best, but Gerald and Adrian holding it down. So, all right. So welcome everyone. And we are recording this call. Please use the notes until we can. And yeah, if you write something in the notes, go ahead and put your initials down there. While I'm getting this first statistic out, I'd love it if everyone could just take their turns, write into that note just your name and your city and what year you went through DVULI, just so I can have an idea of who we're joined by today. So I'm going to start with a statistic that affects just how we're looking at homelessness in general, and affects how we're looking at young people who are experiencing homelessness. So, and I can put this into the chat, but in fact, I'll put all of it into the chat eventually here. Estimates indicate that approximately 1 in 10 adults ages 18, 20 to 25 and 1 in 30 youth ages 13 to 17 will experience homelessness each year. So that's a nationwide statistic. Let's focus on the youth part because there's a young adult component, 1 in 10 young adults. And we know that many of those are the young people that are coming out of the cities that we're in and that we're working with right now. And 1 in 30 young people who are in that middle school, high school range, 13 to 17. So if you say 1 in 30, that's 3%. And so just do some math. I don't know how big the group of young people you're working with. If you're working with a community group that maybe has 100 young people, maybe you're working with a church that has a youth group of 30. But even if you had a church with a youth group of 30, then you're still talking about maybe 1 out of every 30. So at least 1 young person. And this is a nationwide statistic. So this is taking into account every community. We're trying to, and it's our best estimate, but you're looking at rural communities, you're looking at suburban communities, and we aren't dumb. We all know that oftentimes these are the types of things that affect our urban communities in a much more intense way. So I'm just going to write that in here real quick. Well, that is not what I meant to do. Sorry. Copied and pasted the wrong statistic. Okay, here we go. Okay, so estimates indicate that approximately 1 in 10 adults ages 18 to 25 and 1 in 30 youth ages 13 to 17 will experience homelessness each year. 34,703 unaccompanied youth, that's young people that aren't living with the family, were experiencing homelessness in the United States on a single night in January 2023. Once a year, they do what we call in Tacoma, and they do it nationwide, the point in time count, where we're just getting a snapshot, doing our best to get exactly how many people are on the streets at night. And so in January of last year, 34,000 young people were experiencing homelessness without a parent, without a family. And we know that that's so just the risks of what they may fall to is just really astonishing at that point. And then when you're talking about unaccompanied youth, and when you're talking about youth in general, 40% of those are unsheltered, meaning they're sleeping outside in a car or somewhere not meant for human habitation. So when we see, tent encampments and things like that, when we're talking about young people shouldn't be existing in a place that we say that that's not where young people should live. But sometimes we have young people who are experiencing homelessness, who are bouncing from couch to couch, et cetera. So I'm going to turn it to the group here. As I'm looking, I see that we have Adrian from Kansas City, Gerald KC, Myrna Craig from Cleveland, Sean Nelson Houston, 2010, Randy Wright from Detroit, 2011, Stephanie from Grand Rapids, William Lee, Memphis, 2024. Is it, I might be saying that name wrong. So if I am, just please correct me if I'm saying it wrong, William. So yeah, but welcome everybody. So let's just sound off and you can come off chat for this, but would love to know, as I read those quotes of just the size of the problem, is this something that you've experienced working with your young people? Is this something that you've experienced in your city? How are you noticing just how homelessness is affecting urban youth ministry and urban youth work?
So hi, this is Martin from Cleveland. I also work for the city of Cleveland. I work in Ward 7 with one of the council persons here. And the majority of the homeless, well, unhoused shelters and facilities are in our community. And we are seeing a huge rise in homelessness amongst our youth who are in school with their families. And as you say, some who are unoccupied. People who have run away from home and they've started these tent encampments here. So I haven't experienced it in my youth group, but in the city, in the context where I work in the city, it is just the rise of it has just become a lot. to the point where the council here has created an ordinance called a home for every neighbor, and just trying to funnel money and see how do we get away from some of these barriers, like people are refusing to take Section 8 vouchers and other housing assistance vouchers, which is causing an uptick in homelessness, and then just the skyrocketing amount of rent, what it
Yeah.
costs to live here is just
Yeah.
ridiculous.
Yes.
You know what, Myron? I just actually got off a Zoom call, and here was the scenario. Public school teacher had a class of sixth graders, about 20-something students. Everybody's filling out a form for a leadership opportunity. 3 guys raise their hand and say, the form asks for a home address. We don't have home addresses.
Yeah.
And so what do we put?
Yeah.
And first of all, I had to fight back tears, right?
Yeah.
So then, one person pipes up and says, okay, is the name of the car and the license plate acceptable, because that's really where we live?
Yeah.
The other person says, okay, well, at least you have a car. We are under the bridge over on XYZ Street right now.
Yeah.
I'm not talking just the youth, with
Right.
parent, with mom and other sibling as well.
Yeah.
And so I think here's where I'm going though. It felt like they were so willing to offer that information that it's becoming normalized.
Yeah.
They're like acclimated to it. Okay, you're homeless, you're not homeless. You're in a car, you're not in a car. You're under a bridge. These are like, okay, almost acceptable places of residency. That can I just give you my license plate as my mom's license plate as an address for an opportunity? And so, I mean, I don't know what, where that goes, man, but it just, just to hear it that way, that was what kind of came across my mind, is that, okay.
It's normal.
And I think if you normalize it, then if it becomes normal, then who's going to fight it?
Mm-hmm.
And who's going to advocate for it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, it's a great point, Gerald. I remember when I first started recognizing that the young people that I was working with in the neighborhood, some of them, I think we've all been in that spot where you're like, yo, you need to ride home. And someone really doesn't want to ride home. Even you're like, you're crazy. It's raining out. It's close to midnight. It's dark. It's dangerous out there. I can give you a ride, man. It's not a big deal. And then I thought that was the first time once I recognized, like, okay, this kid always shows up in the same fit. This kid, hygiene is a problem. And this kid never wants a ride. And I started to recognize, like, okay, there was a little bit of, there's a shame that you can sense if this person doesn't want to express, here's where I'm living. But Gerald, what I'm hearing you say is, as this becomes more pervasive, it also becomes, it becomes normalized. There's the stigma of young people know, like, hey, it's not just me. It's not just like the 1 in every 30. And like in a lot of communities now, it's like, especially when you're looking at communities that are already experiencing a ton of poverty, and then all of a sudden it's going to be a much higher percentage of that.
Yeah.
I had an incident this past, I guess, school year where my brother is a teacher in the district, and he said to me, oh, hey, I think my students live next door to you. And I'm like, no, I don't think so, and so I started talking about it, and it was like the cousins of the people who live next door to me. So it looks on paper at the school district that there's like 6 or 8 kids that live there, and really there's just 2.
Yeah.
But it's like I mentioned it to Anna. I asked her about, if they were living there, and she said, oh, well, no, but they're not really sure where they're kind of moving around right now. So they have a place to stay, but it's unstable.
Yeah.
So it's like that piece, I think, happens too, where if you look, you're like, there can't be 25 people living in this house, but it's the reality.
It is a reality. And especially with young people, when we're talking about the 40% of young people who are experiencing homelessness are unsheltered. Well, the other 60% are often, it's harder to spot because they may be couch surfing, so they're staying with auntie, they're staying with their friend's house. And, but with the young people that I've met, what that often does is it breaks up that nuclear family. So they're staying with someone besides their parents, because their parents may be finding resources in one place, and their brother may be over here, and their sister may be over here, but they're going to crash over at this place. I want to respond to one thing I heard Myrna say, and then Maria, I see you coming off of mute, so it looks like you have something to add to our conversation as well. Myrna brought up a great point, and it's the first of several resources that we're gonna I'm gonna suggest that if we want to learn more. Myrna talked about the costs of housing in our cities, and she mentioned specifically Cleveland. I'm not sure if it's possible to use the react button, but if housing costs are just unaffordable in your city, maybe throw a thumbs up into that chat so we can see. I see Yamila I'm seeing a thumbs up from Stephanie and from Myrna, Adrian, Maria as well. Sean, I see that, Randy. So yeah, housing costs are a huge, significant problem. There was recently a book published, written by an associate professor here at the University of Washington called Homelessness is a Housing Problem. And instead of trying to look at it from a social science perspective, he was more of a data and statistics person. And he said, this is Dr. Greg Colburn, Homelessness is a Housing Problem. And I'll throw it into the chat at the end when we're talking about resources. What he essentially discovered, he was trying to understand, like, because some people say it's a Democrat city, so that's why that's happening, or it's a Republican city and they don't have this, or it's because of the drug problem, or it's a mental health issue. And so he just wanted to understand, why is it that New York and Los Angeles and San Francisco have a higher rate of homelessness than Detroit or some other city? And doesn't mean that Detroit doesn't have challenges. It's just the rate of homelessness is much higher in some cities. And he recognized that housing costs are the core of the issue, because mental health problems are the same in our cities. It might be a slightly higher, smaller, or drug use is slightly higher or smaller. It doesn't matter if it has a Democrat mayor or a Republican mayor. That's not it. It's not because this city offers social service programs, so everyone's flocking to it. What he just discovered is, if you're in Detroit and you get a $600 a month check from some social support program, you can find a place to live on that amount. But anyone who lives in New York City or Los Angeles or San Francisco will take $600 and say, I literally can't share a room with anyone for that amount of money. And so finding affordable housing for families is a really critical part of offering long-term solutions. So with that, I'm going to turn it back to Maria before we get to our next question.
Yes, I try using the notes. I'm not sure if what I typed got in because I can't see anything.
Okay.
But Jamila Mateo cannot unmute herself. She's at work.
Okay.
But we're from the Boston cohort, and we're currently students of DVULI. We graduate next year.
Excellent.
But I wanted to chime in what you were speaking about. I work with a lot of homeless teens.
Yeah.
Our church is in Brockton, the city of Brockton. We have a very high difficulty with the Brockton High School. There's over 400 kids in the Brockton High School that are currently homeless. And we collaborate, our church collaborates going into the Brockton High School and talking to kids. Our youth group was built from going into the Brockton High School, and we've only been 2 years doing this, but we've gotten to build a relationship where the teens confess of the times they've tried to commit suicide.
Yeah.
Or have thoughts of suicide.
Yeah.
And being new to a youth group and being the youth group leader, it felt overwhelming to me. I've been homeless in my younger years, and as a parent with my kids as well. So how do I say it? It hits me very deeply.
Yeah.
And having a granddaughter teen that's been hospitalized 9 times for suicidal attempts, it hits home very tightly. So our church is around a corner from a YMCA. We're trying to collaborate with them because they house a lot of homeless families that have a lot of children and teens. And we're surrounded by a lot of teens who don't have where to go to be able to entertain themselves. So we're working with the city of Brockton and the mayor to try to build something that they can come, and instead of being in the streets, being at a room at the YMCA with us, we can talk to them, do activities with them, but also provide whatever their needs are, because the teens are very tight-lipped when it comes to saying, I need deodorant.
Right.
We need soap.
Yeah.
And it's the most basic things, but you think that being homeless, they get provided all of these, but not all of them do.
Right.
So I understand, and I love that this conversation is about youth at risk of homelessness, because we also see those families that are on the edge of
Yeah.
becoming homeless. We
Yeah.
have them sleeping under the bridges. We have them sleeping on the parks, sleeping on their cars. So I'm anxious, and I want to hear all of the advice and input that comes out of this.
Yeah. Well, thank you for joining us today, Maria. And it sounds like you'll have a ton to offer as we continue the conversation. And I look forward to getting to spend some time with you here in Grand Rapids in a couple of weeks. So looks like someone has to jump off the chat, but we appreciate you guys. So yeah, we got some shared notes here, but that's okay. So Maria, one thing I heard you refer to is just the meeting of basic needs. And it's something that I want to encourage all, whatever group of young people we're working with. I think if we overlook that if we make the assumption that one person in our group is probably experiencing homelessness, I think that's a better place to start when we're looking at the ministry that each of us do. Because if we're saying, 1 out of every 30, and that's in a standard community, that's a nationwide average. And then we take some of the additional risk factors, and that next question, what barriers or risks to youth have you encountered, and what steps are you taking to address them? I'm going to put another just group of statistics that we can discuss in here that are really about these barriers. And some things that I think might be common to what we're talking about here. Okay, so Black youth have an 83% increased risk of homelessness compared to white youth. Hispanic youth have a 33% increased risk of homelessness compared to white youth. LGBTQ youth are more than twice as likely to experience homelessness as their peers. Young parents have a 3 times higher risk of homelessness than non-parenting peers. And youth who do not complete high school have 3.5 times higher risk of homelessness than peers who completed high school. And 50% of youth age 17 in foster care will experience homelessness by age 21. So if we're looking at the risk factors and applying all these risk factors, just think about the young people you work with. Let's start with the assumption that someone that you are working with right now, you may know it or you may not know it, but someone you're working with right now is experiencing homelessness. Like Gerald said, you can hear from a classroom and you can just look at a young person and you may not know the story, and maybe they're willing to disclose it and just say, hey, can you find me under the car that parks under this overpass? Or you may be in a place where there's still just a deep shame and stigma that Maria may be referring to, of a young person who just, man, they really wish that they didn't have to ask for deodorant. But let's make the assumption that the young people we're working with are experiencing this. And one way that we can, after we just start with that assumption that someone is, we can recognize that what young people face, just in general, but then especially young people who are facing homelessness or experiencing homelessness, there's so much shame and stigma, and we want to remove that as we offer love and kindness in the name of Jesus. We want to make it so easy that if we don't want to make it this thing where you have to sign up and out yourself to say, hey, I need something. But if we can make it the easiest thing in the world to say, here's some basic resources, and it's never any questions asked on it. If you come in and grab deodorant, if you come in and grab a fresh pair of socks, or whatever it is that you may need and that your ministry can offer, and we make it normalized to receive basic things, then for a young person who is experiencing homelessness, they don't have to out themselves to receive some of the love and care that they're talking about. So I put those stats that kind of answer some of this question, but I'm curious to hear from you. Are there any barriers or risks that you've encountered, and what steps are you taking to just address that? And Yamila, I also understand that you are at work, so you can't participate, but glad that you're popping in. So Sean, I see that you popped off of Mike, and Myrna, I see you as well. But Sean, I'll turn to you.
Thank you. I think one of the things, I've been in ministry for 20 years now, and churches and nonprofits, but my last stint was at church, and I think the narrative still rings true of like, I won't say prosperity gospel, but there's a tonality inside the church that, you know, I can't speak to my pain because then I might be seen as somebody who's lacking faith and who doesn't have enough faith to see these changes in my life. And so therefore there's a mute, people go mute on their real issues because oftentimes in churches still the narrative is that you are the head and not the tail. And so if I'm ever experiencing tail moments, I'm not going to talk about them because everybody in here is just blessed and highly favored. And
Yeah.
so I think that's kind of how they say it too, Gerald. And I think that narrative is a roadblock to real opportunities for people to get help. And so I love when you create a space and it's a very like secret space. And I've been a youth pastor for a while, and oftentimes youth don't know what they need, but if they see something that becomes a resource to them or there's a visual aid, they won't ask a question. They'll just go and grab it.
Yes.
You know, it's like my kids, like my son, when he's hungry, when he comes home from school, he goes straight to the pantry.
He knows. Yeah.
He ain't gonna never tell us he's hungry, but
Yeah.
I know he's hungry because the
Yeah.
first thing he does is go in that pantry and he
Yeah.
raids that thing.
Yeah.
And then he goes back and forth and he goes from cereal to sandwiches and all this other stuff. And so what if we just created, you know, we don't like, I love what you said, Myron, about not blasting them and not creating this silo effect when they actually have a need. But what if we just, for lack of better terms, like a pantry, a needs pantry where they can just go, because the narrative is so strong oftentimes in churches, that I think it rings true. Even if you don't go to church, some people might feel like, well, I can't go there asking for help, man, because they're going to see all I ever do is come here and ask for help.
Yeah.
And so that narrative is true. And so I think food pantries, needs pantries, necessities pantries are more needed than we ever figured before.
Yeah, that's a great word. I love what I heard you say is just that at the church, sometimes it's hard, even if it's not this prosperity gospel, it's sometimes hard to say like, hey, this is the need, because we do view people who are experiencing something like homelessness or just financially not doing as well as another person. It's almost like there's something wrong with them. Like they did that, like God's not blessing them. And if they were living a just or godly life, they wouldn't be in that spot. So it makes it very difficult to admit, especially in church settings. And you referenced church, and we know that that can happen, but it is throughout society. People tend to look at people who are experiencing homelessness with, well, what'd you do? Instead of asking like, what happened to you or what's your story? It's almost like we just assume that this is their fault. And we add that stigma onto their life that shames them and separates them from society. So I really appreciate what you're saying there. I love let's make resources just available without having to make everyone jump through a bunch of stuff to get that. So Myrna, you came off mute earlier. Would love to hear from you.
Yeah, so there's a couple of things that we do as a church and also in the community. So we have 6 blessing boxes throughout the community. They're like little libraries. That's what they look like. And they're not necessarily for food, because so many places have food, but we try to keep like socks, deodorant, toothpaste, shaving things, feminine products, things of that nature. When it's school time, it's back to school stuff in there. When it's rainy season, there's umbrellas in there. When it's cold, there's hats and gloves and scarves in there. And then we try to intentionally put them near schools and also near bus stops,
Wow.
because bus shelters, because a lot of the unhoused people hang out in the bus shelters because it's a place to stay out of the elements and it's a place to sit and things of that nature. And so we also, our schools here in the city, they have what are called resource rooms where there's washing machine and dryers and there's like underwear and socks and things. And so we help stock our local schools with those items as well, because we know that a lot of the kids, we have over 3,000, and that was the numbers in 2020. that are unhoused in our school district.
Mhm.
But then you have to add another layer to it because we have to then talk about unsheltered, unhoused. Like
Mhm.
you have the unhoused who are in shelters, but then you have the unsheltered unhoused that are living in cars, living in encampments, living and things of that nature. And so that's a different degree of safety issues and concerns and things of that nature. And so it's just a very complex issue. And to try to make sure that they have the things that they can't get maybe at other places. And like you said, to not shame them.
Yeah.
But it does concern me that it is becoming so normalized that it's just a, this is just what we do. And so what we try to do from we go into the unhoused shelters and things and try to help people understand we can't live in silos anymore. You have to figure out, everybody is like, oh, I'm trying to get this 1-bedroom apartment. And we're like, no, you need to try to figure out how in community you all can get out of this together.
Yeah.
Because you're not going to get $1,000 is what we're starting with for like 1 bedroom. So you're not going to get that by yourself. We have to start thinking about like a community. And so those are just some of the things that we do on our own and some of the things we do to try to help the people who are doing the work every day.
I love that. I love that you've taken the initiative, because I think, sometimes people look at like a school resource room and think that thing magically stocks itself. But when you say like, hey, as a ministry, we're going to go stock it, especially if we're part of the church, if we're employed by the church, or, like those are things we can advocate for that go beyond a blessing for the young people that walk in the doors of the youth group, but becomes a blessing for the community as a whole. And I love those blessing boxes. Like, what if you could talk to every church in your neighborhood and say, hey, here's the idea of a blessing box. It's just mercy ministries, just for anybody. And we don't, we just make sure it's stocked. And if someone comes in and takes too much, then we're just going to assume that it'll eventually get to where it needs to go, and that God's going to multiply that and do as he will. So thank you.
And can I just add, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I want us to be careful too in the mentality of making sure that we are caring about them as much as we care about ourselves. When I collect items from our members, I'm like, do not bring me stuff you would not use.
Yeah.
Do not bring me a bottle of detergent this big just because it was $2 and it's mostly water.
Yeah.
So we try to put quality items inside of these boxes, because just because you need something, I feel like it doesn't mean it's not dignity in it. We're not going to just throw slop at you because you are in need. So that's one of our big things, is to make sure that we're doing for them. I wouldn't put anything in those boxes that I personally don't use myself. And so, because I've seen people do that, and that just frustrates me.
We had one person, so like just rough. This one person showed up at our donation center, and yeah, because we're always accepting, especially personal hygiene products are very important in the unhoused community. And we had this one lady show up, and she had all of the leftover soap bars. When the bar of soap just becomes a little like sliver, and she had this Ziploc bag full of these. We're like, lady, we're not, like, it's offensive that you would think that we would tell someone to like use this sliver of a bar of soap that's essentially someone else's trash, so yeah.
Hey, Myron, this is the chance for me to kind of plug the resource networking workshop that we do for DVULI. And the fact that so many, in terms of having relationships with people who have products and then things that people can use, be mindful of the fact while you're doing whatever blessing box or open pantry, whatever, that there's so many of these manufacturers that might even be producing stuff in your cities.
Yeah.
They overproduce and overstock because they have to give so much away, right? So having relationships with those kind of people and those corporations, so that when holiday time comes, or not holiday time comes, if whatever it is, that they have overrun whatever they're producing, make sure you're on their list of people to give and to receive whatever it is that their skids and stuff they just give away,
Yeah.
And so it's important to have those kind of relationships. Yep.
Yeah, I love it. Yeah, someone in the chat says we have a place that offers space to recharge phones and get internet. Love that. Especially, I think, and amongst older people too, they still kind of look at cell phones as like a luxury, and they're like, well, how come they got cell phones, but but then you realize like you can't navigate society today unless you have a cell phone. And so, you know, even if you're just a place where you tell kids like, hey, come sit down and plug in, charge your phone, use the Wi-Fi, do what you need to do. I think that just offers young people a great place to even create relationship. If you can just sit down with them and, hey, I got you a cup of,
that
you know,
was my comment, Myron. We do have, it's called HQ. So they have, they also have counselors on site so they can try to get them connected. But a lot of kids, they have like their books, their, you know, MacBooks or whatever they get from school. And then it's not real helpful if you don't have the internet or you don't have, you know, power to charge it. So
yeah.
That's one of the things, as well as they have lockers where kids can leave stuff so they don't have to carry all their things all of the day everywhere.
Yeah. Yeah, I love it. Stephanie, I'm gonna put our next question in there, which says, what kind of curriculum or tools are you using to effectively minister and instruct in this area? We've kind of been talking about this and offering some ideas, but I want to keep hearing from others, even if you have a curriculum or something that you've worked through, but other tools and resources. I love sharing some of the ideas that we're already generating. So especially if you haven't had a chance to share yet, we'd love to hear from you.
I think there was a couple of hands that went up.
Yeah.
Mateo, are you? Yep.
Yes, I'm able to speak now. I'm sorry about that.
Go for it.
Hello. I was so excited. I emailed Myron because I'm like, I do this for a living. So I'm the neighborhood coordinator for the city of New London. And I work with a lot of unhomed people, anyone who needs resources. I basically revitalize neighborhoods for our residents to either be safer or to really help them thrive and empower our residents here in Connecticut. So one thing, a curriculum that I created is basically every single resource you can think of. So housing, evictions, down to law, down to immigration, mental health. I have it all in a packet. And I'm in the middle of trying to put it on our website because it's really important for me, for residents to be aware that these are things that are happening. And I would love to hear like how you guys are doing it. But I think it's really important that, especially when it comes to municipalities and organizations, there does need to be a bridge connected. And I think there is a big gap between the churches, between cities, between towns, and these organizations that are already doing the work. So the city comes in, they try to fix and pull out and take out any fires when people are already doing it. So in this next year, I'm really trying to like bridge gaps that and partner with people who maybe haven't done it in the past. So that's just a simple thing. Like if your organization can just have resources already available, like 211, they always have things available. Some of them, that's the first people I say call. So that's just, and I have 9 pages of it. So I can always send it anyone's way, just so you have an example of it. And I'm trying to make it look pretty as well. So for the future.
Yeah.
We would love to access that. And I don't know if you have a web link or what's the easiest way, but shoot it over to Stephanie via email if you want to. And we will make sure that this gets distributed to all of those that are on this call also. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
I wanted to add, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead, Maria.
I wanted to add to collaborating with corporations. Right now, I've been able to collaborate with Walmart, Target, Shaw's, working on Market Basket, to be able to provide what we do. We put in our church, we have a separate room with a separate entrance, and what we do is we make bags, and we make bags of the most basic. And Marshall's is another corporation I also collaborate with in providing some clothing. So little by little, I am putting together a curriculum of resources through these organizations.
Mhm.
We also get clothes that are in good condition that are donated. We hang them up in that room, and then we make the basic bags so that our youth can come in and just take one. We don't ask them if you need it or anything, just take one.
Yeah.
Take what you see in the clothing. We provide bags of food for the families. We provide English classes for the Spanish speaking. Where our church is connected, there's a lot of multi language, and a lot of the teens speak very little English. And it's a block for them to learn in high school as well. So we collaborate with the high school to try to find a way to translate what they're learning into classrooms where they can help with resources to do that, because it's a block for some of the teens to even pass their grades.
Yeah.
Some of them get lost in their high schools trying to find the classroom they're going to.
Yeah.
Parents are getting calls and they're not understanding why they're getting the calls. So that's another resource we provide. I go personally to the parents' house and I translate whatever they were trying to get from the school, go with them to the school so they can also I can translate what their concerns are with their children as well. So I just want to give kudos to Pastor Bell, and let him know that that is something that we learned through DVULI on our NC1 about that collaboration and going to corporations. Mind you, I'm new at it, but I am very easy in advocating for talking to corporations and the need there it is. And I can be told no 70 times, and I'll go back 70 times and just, okay, we're still here, if you're willing to help,
They just
building
want to
that
get you to quit
list.
knocking on the door.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And then we also have one charity we have. It's a fashion show with the teens. And Marshalls provides the clothes for them to have that fashion show, and we do it as a night of donation, and they get to keep the clothes at the end of the night. So
really great.
that's where I've started with for the last 2 years.
Okay, so Yamila, I see your hand raised. Randy, I also noticed that you're off of mute. So Randy, I haven't heard from you yet, so would love to hear from you.
Okay. Yeah, I was just thinking about what Gerald said. We had a volunteer. She actually could have been staff because she worked with our women's department and with the youth. And we had 5 young people who were in our ministry. And because of the abuse from their dad, they became homeless. We were able to get them to a shelter. But the lady, her name is Brenda. Brenda had such a connection with a lot of organizations, and she was able to get clothing, food, so even though they were in the shelter, for a while, she was able to connect them with these various organizations. Eventually we got them housing that was financed by the city. And it's just like you said, but at that time it was such a devastating thing, because here you are talking about 5 kids ages 14 to 5, where to live, nowhere to go. But we had some very caring people and organizations that stepped in and were able to help. And they donated so much stuff that we were even able to give it out to other young people that were part of our organization. Like I said, the toothpaste, deodorants, feminine products, whatever it was, socks, and coats too. Because Detroit get very cold, so a lot different being here in Texas now. But back in Detroit, we had coat drives and shoe drives, and just people that just wanted to love on families and young people. And I'm just grateful to have been a part of that.
I love it. Thank you for sharing that. Yamila, I see your hand raised. I want to let you speak.
Yes. And thank you so much, Randy, because that's good. Like unhomed youth is super, super big right now. But I did want to say, it's not just about what we do as organizations, but also law, like in legislative. So here in Connecticut, we have a fair rent commission. If you have over 26,000 people in your town or city, you are required to have a fair rent commission. Basically, here in Connecticut, we have people from Massachusetts. So shout out Boston. I'm in the Boston cohort. I also work part-time in Boston, but then there's, oh my goodness, Rhode Island, New York, they're all coming in and they're basically trying to take these housing, right? So we have apartments, we have all of these different people, corporations, and the rent is completely high. So it's a way to basically neutralize that. We have a commission and they come in, they have a mediator as well, and they put in a complaint form. I literally am the staff liaison, so I go through all of that with them. So it's a way and a second chance for families to really navigate and negotiate a new rent and a new lease. But then also if that doesn't work out, they can go to the commission and it becomes a full hearing. And if that doesn't work out, they can appeal it to the court, and then it's up to a judge to really stipulate that agreement. But I did want to say that being unhomed could also cause, like, you look at the laws, right? And I think, Myron, you mentioned it about like Democrat, Republican, all of that, right? Which state you live in. But I think it's really important to advocate and go to your capital and go to your cities because they have the power to pass ordinances to prevent homelessness.
Yeah. Policy advocation is a huge part of intersecting because here's the reality is that all of us are intersecting with homelessness at various levels where we have differing degrees of influence. But homelessness as a whole and youth homelessness is almost like the unintentional casualty that happens as a result of all of the broken systems of homelessness that affect our society as a whole. So we just got a few minutes left, so I want to kind of wrap us up in closing, but do really want to state because there are so many broken systems that lead to homelessness, you can't do this work without collaboration. So I love that we're shouting out Gerald. I love that we're shouting out that piece of curriculum. I strongly suggest, like, it's very difficult to say, okay, so I'm going to meet all these really emergent needs. And now I have to go and shop for 200 little deodorant sticks and I have to get 200 pairs of, you can't do that. But there are partner organizations. I love the persistence of Maria. Strongly suggest if you haven't connected with the emergency food network in your town, or if you haven't connected with food banks, or if you haven't connected with rescue mission shelters like mine, and I forget who said it, it might have been Myrna, that there is a gap between the municipalities, the government, the resources that the government wants to provide. And the government often doesn't have the relational resource with young people that you are the ones who carry. So you are the ones who know the young person who can put the resources in their hand. And it's oftentimes our municipalities don't have that relationship and don't have that access. So we get to be the ones who stand in the gap, both in a spiritual sense and in a practical sense. So someone asks, can we share the notes to our emails? I'm sure we can figure that out, Stephanie.
So yeah, that's on me. So I'm producing this meeting. So I'm taking all the notes and I'll be emailing everybody that's involved. So you'll have each other's emails as well.
Yeah. So 5 minutes left in our call. What professional development resources, seminars, conferences, etc. should be on everyone's radar? I'll throw the first one out. We're part of the Citygate network. They do a national conference every year. Citygate is primarily for rescue missions, for shelters, for gospel missions, for adults who are experiencing homelessness and families. We serve multiple families. So we've probably got 80 young people in our shelter right now, in our family shelter, but it's not specifically geared around youth experiencing homelessness, but if there is a Citygate conference happening nearby, I would recommend that you at least show up and hear what they're talking about and advocate, like it was Emila saying, that we need to be advocating for our young people. So Citygate Network is one that I can make available, but would love to hear what other resources other people are tapping into for professional development. and oftentimes the silence on this question can represent a few things. There's not a ton of resources designed for young people experiencing homelessness. And when we talk about homelessness, oftentimes we're working with the adults because the system is designed for adults, but the young people are this casualty that fall aside on the resource, you know, that.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that, Myron. I think, you know, kind of what went to mind was like, okay, well, you know, if I were doing this kind of work, will I want to go to a conference and convene with other people doing this kind of work? I just wasn't sure.
Yeah.
Because I think you know, I would rather spend the money on a flight and a hotel to get to somebody that needs it, you know, than, you know, you know, at the Marriott at some kind of convention center and 3 or 4 days, you know, and certainly it's important, especially if they're talking to solutions, but man, I'd really grapple with that. But I think Maria unmuted. Be curious to hear what she knows.
Yeah, Maria, do you have any suggestions for that?
Yes. I'm currently communicating with the mayor's office for the city of Brockton.
Okay.
And I'm trying to build a youth task force that the mayor can help with any funding that is needed specifically for the teens in families of teens, because teens will not say what their family needs or are going through. So it's been very rough trying to get them to sit down with me. I got one meeting so far, but I keep following up, and because they said they were going to sit down to build a task force and what we can do in the city of Brockton. So I give them 2 weeks and then I send them another email or a call. And that's what I'm trying to do right now. Tap into that resource because we provide the COVID tests for the kids at our church so they can take home in case they need it. We collaborate to have the vaccines available at our church as well. But right now, I would love and I pray that I'm able to do that youth task force with the city of Brockton.
I love it. I love it. Yeah, and oftentimes, you know, what I've experienced working with an agency that's directly involved in homelessness is it tends to be a bipartisan issue especially when we involve young people. So if you go to a local politician and say, hey, I want to do something that helps young people who are experiencing homelessness, most local politicians want a good idea, but they don't necessarily have all of the resources to pull off. But if you can say, hey, I can bring some community organization to this, a lot of times you're going to find a little more willingness to do something. We did something that doesn't like solve the problem at all, but around Christmas time, we had like photographers go around. We did this thing called Pictures of Hope, where someone would like take a picture of, like, we gave young people cameras and we had them take a picture of something that represents hope to them. And then we made like Christmas greeting cards using those pictures. And we sold the greeting cards on our website. So that way all the proceeds would go to that family and to that young person and, you know, help them transition from shelter into transitional housing. But the city was so willing to put some money behind that just because we all want to do something, especially when we say, hey, this is a kid, this isn't their fault, you know. I put a couple books on there. My favorite book that really unpacks all of the just systems that really interact to create homelessness. It's not specifically focused on youth homelessness, but it's about homelessness in general. It's called When We Walk By. The person is a Jesus person, a person of faith, but they don't write explicitly from that. It can be used in secular circles as well, but it talks about all of the broken systems and offers some ideas and unique ways that we can interact with that system. So we are at time. Would love to hear from everyone. Just last bit, just throw into the chat one way that our DVULI team can be praying for you. And we would love to take that and just be praying for each of you and praying for each other as we share these notes out. So please, before you head on.
For his time today, everybody, if you can just drop a little emoji in or whatever, just to express some love for Myron being with us on today. We greatly appreciate you, sir. Loved everything that you shared. Really, 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 really did. Yeah. So
Thank
It's-
you, and looking forward to meeting a few of you in Grand Rapids in a couple weeks here. So
Absolutely, absolutely, yeah.
I just want to make aware, that I'm not seeing anything in the chat with the notes. So what is the author of that book that you